Please take your seat, and a friendly reminder to silence your cell phone.
How does she do it? How does she keep going amid the sound and the fury of politics? Here's how. It's because she never, ever forgets who she's fighting for.
She does that because she feels deep in her heart that here in the greatest country on earth, everybody deserves a shot.
I hope to unify our country. I hope to bring people together. I hope to break down every barrier that prevents Americans from joining hands and making our country everything it should be. That's what I hope for my grandchildren, and I know that's what my mother would hope for me.
But we just don't have time for it. Not enough.
We're going to give them every chance we can to develop their minds so that they can play a role in this state and this country to make it the kind of place it needs to be. If there is one message that echoes forth from this conference, let it be that human rights are women's rights and women's rights are Nearly 66 million Americans voted for a future where there are no ceilings on our dreams.
Learn as much from our successes, our mistakes. Don't forget you're merely one of many others on the journey every generation makes. We did not end injustice, and neither will you. Let's truly make strides so we know you can do. Make peace with our incomplete power and use it for good, 'cause there's so much to do, so much to do. Things will feel small and no loss is too large. Keep marching, keep marching. Keep marching, keep marching.
My life and the history of our country is that progress is possible but not guaranteed. We have to fight for it and never ever give up.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome former Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton and best-selling author Maria Semple.
Secretary Clinton, may I call you Hillary? You gave an electrifying speech at the DNC. During it, they cut away to Gwen Walls, who was fighting back tears. It was something that I recognized personally because I too was fighting back tears when I saw you on the stage, and I think a lot of people in this audience are probably doing it now. You so many things. You've been the victim of misogyny in all its forms, institutional, overt, and internalized. The election, you won by nearly 2.9 million popular votes for Johnson. You're the target of a Russian propaganda campaign, which you recognized before anyone else. You had to hand the baton to a woman on track to break the highest glass ceiling that you weren't able to. And you showed grace, dignity, and resilience in the face of it all. How does it feel to be one woman trying to get through life the best she can while representing so much to so many?
Oh, Maria, that's a hard question to answer because I feel every day that I'm so lucky to have lived the life I've lived. That's obviously what this book is about, the ups and the downs. It's actually called Something Lost, Something Gained, from that wonderful Joni Mitchell song, Both Sides Now. And I feel like, my life has, really coincided with so much change in our country and the world, but particularly here in the United States. And I've been lucky enough to be part of helping to push some of that change forward. And now we are on the brink of what I hope will be transformational change with the election of Kamala Harris. It gives me an enormous amount of joy to think that we will finally right this wrong that started literally at the beginning of our country, leaving women out, leaving women behind. And it took a real struggle to get women the vote, and then it took even longer to get Black women and Asian American women and Native American women and Latina women to get the vote, even though the law was there and the Constitution had been amended. So this has been a long struggle, but boy, has it been worth it. And we're on the brink of making it.
First asked to interview you, I immediately thought of all these deeply personal questions I wanted to ask but didn't dare. But then I read Something Lost, Something Gained. It's a great book. It's deeply personal, and you take no prisoners. You take us into your kitchen at Chappaqua while you and President Clinton were watching the insurrection on January 6th live on TV. We hear about the girls' nights you threw at the White House, including an engagement party for Susan Collins. You share a heart-wrenching letter John F. Kennedy Jr. wrote to you after his mother's death. You bring us into the First Family's holding area at Rosalind Carter's funeral, where to your surprise you walk in and see Melania Trump. In other words, you really spilled the tea in this book. I'm wondering what got into you.
Well, a lot of people have been asking me that. I think truly what motivated the book more than anything was seeing Joni Mitchell at the Grammys earlier this year, where, as I describe in the book, she looked like she was sitting on a throne and singing Both Sides Now. And that song and its lyrics go back to my college years and my early 20s, and I hear it differently now. When I first heard it, we've looked at love from both sides now, up and down, and looked at life and all that. I had no idea. And I think I experienced the song differently at various points in my life. And now I am at a point where I can really take stock of everything that I have, had in my life, trying to understand it, trying to put it in perspective. So this is really a book on the personal side about family and friendship and experiences like being First Lady, but also, of course, it's political because I want people to understand in a very profound way how politics, whether you like it or not, impacts the life you will lead and impacts the choices you can make. We see that obviously, now on a range of things, most importantly, reproductive rights. So it was kind of a chance to write some essays and ask myself, so what am I thinking? And how can I best express that?
When you left Arkansas for the White House, you were given the advice to trust no one. Indeed, you write about how public life can make you feel alone in a crowded room. Still, the book is a love letter to all the friendships you've made since then, and it's so inspiring. And I'm wondering how you navigated public life and the ability to make such deep, lasting friendships.
You're absolutely right. People, people in public life, I think, understandably, are wary of new friends. And so they don't want to get close to people. They worry, well, what do those people want from me? And could they, get me in trouble because of something they did or said? I totally understood that. So a number of people said, don't make new friends. But I found that impossible. I have met so many extraordinary people and a lot of just amazing women in particular, in the years since Bill started running for president. And I can't imagine having some artificial barrier, which is like, I think I would like you, but I can't afford to get to know you because, I'm now on this big global stage. So I have made some of the best friends of my life, people that I was lucky enough to work with in the White House when I was a senator, in the State Department, on campaigns. And I have, made friends because of friends who introduced me to people. I wrote a book, a thriller with Louise Penny, the great mystery writer. She became my friend because my best friend from childhood, Betsy, met her after the 2016 convention because she was doing an interview and a reporter said, well, you've grown up with, Hillary Clinton, what do you guys do together? And Betsy said, we do this, we do that. And one of the things she said was, and ever since we were little girls, we read books and talked about books and traded books and when we were real little, we'd go to the library together and all of that. And so she told this to the reporter, and the reporter said, so what are you reading now? And just serendipitously, Betsy said, well, we're reading the latest Louise Penny mystery. So it was published, and then Louise's publisher contacted Betsy and said, would you like to meet her? And so in August of 2016, Betsy met her. And then in the fall of 2016, Louise's husband died after a long illness, so Betsy let me know, so I wrote a note to Louise. And then after the election, Betsy brought us together, and we spent time together, we vacationed together. And then in late 2019, after Betsy had passed away, after a long battle with breast cancer, we were asked to write a book together. So the book, State of Terror, the two lead characters, one, Ellen, is a dear friend of mine who died in May of 2019, and then my brother died in June of 2019, and then Betsy died in July of 2019. It was a horrible, horrible 3 months of loss. And so we then wrote this book, and one of the characters is named Ellen, the Secretary of State character, and her best friend's named Betsy. And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is named Whitehead. He's a character like Louise's late husband. So it was a real act of friendship as well as imagination. But making new friends, I have a chapter about friendship, and it's, the title is, make new friends. One is silver, the other's gold, from this old Brownie song that I used to sing. So that's how I feel about it.
I loved reading about Betsy. She was there for so many important and heartbreaking moments for you. And you say that as teenagers at camp, you and Betsy would, quote, whisper our secrets and our dreams, which included living a life of service. That's not what I was praying for when I was a teenager.
Well, there were other things.
I'm wondering, where did this commitment to service come from? Because you've really walked the talk in the biggest way possible. And I'm wondering how you've been able to sustain it in the face of heartbreaking setbacks.
You know, I really think it comes from primarily my mother. And I write about her in the book because she had such a difficult childhood and was abandoned by her parents and sent to live with her paternal grandparents, and her grandmother was extremely cruel. And so by the time she was 13, she left that house and went to work for a family taking care of kids in the family. And when I first learned about that, I was so shocked because I thought, wow. I mean, you know, when I was 13, it's like what you were saying, all I cared about was my friends and, you know, the boys that I liked and, you know, all the things that you do when you're 13. And here was my mother, you know, on her own, working to support herself. But the woman was so kind to her that it really made a big difference in my mother's life. And the kindness included creating a schedule so that my mother could go to high school, which is something she really wanted to do. And so my mother came out of this very difficult childhood with a real sense that you had to be helping other people, because people had helped her along the way, even though her family had neglected her. And I think that was a big part of it. I think, you know, the church that I went to, and I write about, you know, my faith and why it's been a real, you know, rock for me, because you know, I was told you're supposed to help people, you're supposed to do things that, you know, you're fortunate, you're healthy, you know, there's an expectation that you will give back. So I think really, the combination of, you know, my mother, who was a Sunday school teacher mostly so she could keep an eye on my brothers, but she did teach Sunday school, and, you know, the church that I grew up in, you know, really did set me on this path. And then my first real job was for Marian Wright Edelman, this amazing African-American lawyer who had worked with Dr. King and had, after Dr. King's assassination, set up the organization that became the Children's Defense Fund. And I saw in her a great role model and someone who I really admired greatly. So I think it was a lot of experiences along the way. But for me, you know, service, as Marian used to say all the time, service is the rent we pay for living. And if you're able to give back in some way, it doesn't have to be big, it doesn't have to make headlines, but you know, there's just, it's like with my mother, the kindnesses that people showed her kept her going through a lot of turmoil. And I think that's what we should all, you know, try to figure out how to do in our own way. We all have different talents, we all have different gifts, and, you know, there's lots of ways that we can, you know, serve one another. And I think we need it in our country, especially now, because there's so much divisiveness and finger pointing and negativity.
A way to go big. I was really inspired to read that after you left office, how much you've been able to do as a private citizen. And in the chapter, White Scarves, you describe in harrowing, edge-of-your-seat detail about the kill list of Afghanistan women targeted by the Taliban, many of whom you personally knew, and your under-the-radar emergency operation to evacuate them in 2021. It's one of the most riveting pieces of writing I've ever read in terms of just the stakes involved and what you did to pull all this together. Could you please tell us about this really amazing operation you did to save the women from the Taliban?
Well, it was truly one of the most extraordinary activities, projects I've ever been involved in, and it was really kicked off by my great fear that the Taliban would come back into power. I thought the agreement that Trump had reached with the Taliban was a surrender agreement, and I thought that it would empower the Taliban to basically take its message into the countryside in Afghanistan, that people had better fall in line because they were coming back, and I think that's exactly what happened. And so in the time that Joe Biden came into office, he too made the decision that we should withdraw from Afghanistan. And he had a difficult challenge because Trump had agreed that we would withdraw by May of 2021. And that was impossible for a new president, and Biden basically said, I can withdraw by September 11th. Shortly after that decision was made, I was given a piece of intelligence that had been acquired from the Taliban, which was a list of Afghan women who were not working for the United States or any NATO power, any other country. They were, you know, in the government of Afghanistan. They were elected officials. They were journalists and business women and running colleges and schools and hospitals, and they were not going to be evacuated by any government because our government had no responsibility for them. They didn't work for the embassy or the military or any other part of our governmental presence. So in looking at the list, I recognized a lot of names because I've been, you know, involved with Afghanistan, and particularly the women, since I was First Lady, and then as Senator, I visited, and not just going to Afghanistan, but in other settings, meeting a lot of the women. And then as Secretary of State, I obviously was in Afghanistan often and going to conferences around the world to help support the Afghan government and people. So when I saw the list, and it was called the kill list, I knew that these women would be in very grave danger. I didn't think if, I thought when the Taliban took over. And it happened very quickly, as we all remember, and what we did between the time of getting the list and the fall of Kabul was to gather contact information about all these women and more women, because as we were reaching out, telling women we wanted to know where to find them if something happened and how to help them. So we ended up with a list of about 1,000 women and how to reach them through, you know, WhatsApp and Signal and every other means of communication. So when Kabul fell, we created this network. Among the most important parts of the network was Vital Voices, a group that I helped to start back in the late 1990s. And it's an extraordinary network of women leaders around the world, led by Elise Nelson, who is here tonight in Seattle. The Georgetown Institute of Women, Peace and Security, started by the first Global Women's Ambassador that
was appointed during the Obama administration, Ambassador Melanne Revere. We had Afghan Americans who spoke, languages that were important. So the bottom line is we felt like we were ready to help, but the intensity of the need to get women out quickly was just overwhelming. So once Kabul fell, we had a 24-hour Zoom room so that we could stay in touch with these women, they could stay in touch with us. And we were getting messages that were so horrifying and just heartbreaking, like a woman whispering on her phone, the Taliban is at my mother's house. They say if she doesn't tell them where I am, they're going to come back and kill her tomorrow. What do I do? I mean, so it was just this incredibly stressful time. But we began to charter planes, charter buses to get the women through the Taliban checkpoints. And, honestly, talk to anybody, but not somebody who shouts and screams. difficult time that we are living in, and I am more than happy, as I say, to talk to anybody about the complexity of the situation in the Middle East and about the history and about the context. I've done it with students that I teach at Columbia, I've done it with young people in other settings, but I will not respond to somebody who screams. What happened to Afghan women because of the extraordinary oppression by the Taliban, and we had to find places for these women to go. So I began calling, global leaders, and they were incredibly responsive. So the Prime Minister of Canada, Trudeau, said he would take 1,000, women that came. Qatar, which is a country that you have to deal with because they will talk to anybody, and that is useful. So they will talk to the Taliban, they will talk to Hamas, and you need somebody who will talk to, the groups that you're trying to, figure out how to deal with and help people who are oppressed by them. And the best answer was from the Prime Minister of Albania, who, some of you may not know this, but Albania was the only European country at the end of World War II that actually had more Jews at the end of the war than before the war, because they gave safe passage and Eddie Rama, the Prime Minister, said, well, of course we'll help. That is who we are. That is our tradition. So he ended up taking more than 1,000 women and their families. And I'll just end with this one story because it's all told in the book. And the chapter is called White Scars, because we had a real problem getting the women we were trying to help onto the airport. And then we had that horrific suicide bombing. And the suicide bombing killed 13 of our Marines and hundreds of our Afghans. And, I think that, part of the challenge that we faced was trying to get our women through these checkpoints with the Taliban, then trying to get them, onto the airport, to get the planes that we had chartered or other planes that were willing to take them. And we were, again, working with the Qatari government, because they could talk to the Taliban and have them let our buses through. So we had 3 buses, and those buses had, about 30 women on each bus.
and they were all on their phones, and we were moving them through the Taliban checkpoint when the Taliban got on the bus. And they got on the bus and they demanded to see passports, because that was something, starting in June, we began to make sure women had passports. So they went through, they looked at the passports, they made the women take off their headscarves even to compare them to the pictures. And then they came back and they said, yes, but you don't have visas. Well, of course they didn't have visas. The embassies all were shut down. Nobody was processing visas. So that was a problem. And one of our Vital Voices representatives, who happened to be in Albania, who was in the live Zoom because the women on the buses were giving us this detailed information, reached out to one of the foreign ministry representatives she'd gotten to know in Albania and explained our problem. Now the Taliban were demanding visas. So this foreign ministry officer went to a local food market, and he took a picture of the barcode on a bag of potatoes, and then he went back to the foreign ministry, and with the picture of the barcode, which looked really official, he put that on the Albanian Foreign Ministry official stationery, and then issued visas based on that, electronic visas. And then we sent them to all the women on the bus, so that when the Taliban got back on, they just held their phones up with these electronic visas, and that solved that problem. But it was like a problem an hour for a month. It was so intense, but we were able to evacuate over 1,000 women and their families, and many of them are now.
Now moving on to Kamala Harris. Friendship and guidance. You've hosted dinners for her throughout her vice presidency, offering emotional and strategic support. Could you tell us about your personal relationship with Vice President Harris?
Well, I've known her since she was a DA in San Francisco, and her sister worked for me in the 2016 campaign, and I got to know her very well. And then her husband is a good friend of my son-in-law. Does this sound like kind of a, interconnected relationship? And so I feel like I know her personally and obviously politically and professionally. So when she became vice president, I had a pretty good idea of how difficult that job was under any circumstances. It's really a very hard job, and the people who have held that, let's just keep talking, the people who have held that job have, often been frustrated because it is difficult to know exactly what your assignments are, your responsibilities. And for both the vice president and the president, why do people pay to come and yell? Both of them were coming into office at such a difficult time. Remember, there was this pandemic, and it was also following 4 years of the former guy, and it was really challenging. So I think being vice president for any president is a kind of disorienting experience, because usually you come into it, you've been a senator, which gives you a lot of independence, which I know because I was one for 8 years, or maybe you were a governor, and so you have a lot of responsibility and authority, and all of a sudden you're a vice president. And so I knew that it would take, some kind of getting used to, and especially during such a fraught time. So yes, I had a lot of conversations with Kamala. I saw her whenever I could. She would call me, and I just tried to offer whatever help I could, because they were trying to govern at such a challenging moment in our country's history. I personally think, the Biden-Harris administration did such a great job. President Biden made that really selfless act of patriotism unlike anything my husband and I immediately expressed our appreciation to him, and he endorsed Kamala. We immediately endorsed her, and we did it really for primarily the reason we thought she'd be a good president. We thought, I think she has the character, the values, and I also thought that it was appropriate, because she ran with him. They were the ticket during the primaries. It was Joe Biden and his vice president. And they were extremely successful in, winning the delegates to be nominated. It was a team, and so I thought that the fact that people who were delegates knew that they were voting for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris made her movement to run for the presidency absolutely the best choice we could make. And so, from my perspective, so part of it for me was being very excited to support somebody who I know and respect. And I thought the convention was amazing. I thought her speech and I loved the way she wiped the floor with Trump at the debate.
Watched the debate, and what did you think?
Well, I had talked with her about the debate. She had very smartly used the people who had prepared me because they, I won all 3 debates, and they know. Particularly, I recommended that the man who played Trump for me is somebody who had worked for me since I was in the Senate. And honestly, he channels Trump in the most obnoxious way. He shows up with lifts in his shoes and pancake makeup, and his hair, hairsprayed, and a long tie, and I told Kamala, I said, you will hate him. But because he literally knows everything that Trump has said, he will throw it all at you. And that means you will be really well prepared. And I later heard from people who were in the prep sessions, there was nothing Trump said that she had not heard from the guy. She should bait him, and boy, did she ever. I baited him about Putin and nuclear weapons, which, I'm not sure, it really pierced him because, he's never said a bad word about Putin, so it doesn't upset him when I, said he was Putin's puppet. She baited him about how people were bored at his rallies. People were there anyway, and he just, he went off the edge.
I recently moved to New York, and one of my first acts as a New Yorker was to get in line at 3 in the morning so I could be in the Trump criminal trial. And I did. I made it in the courtroom. And because I really wanted to witness for myself Donald Trump's standing trial, and I got to look in his eye 8 times. He came back and forth 8 times in this glowering, ridiculous presence of his, and very orange. The orange is real. I was really I was prepared, but not prepared. convicted on 34 felony counts of election fraud.
I actually write about this too because I was finishing the edits on my book and it had to get in by the end of June, and I was, furiously making, changes and seeing what the editors had suggested. So I had, put my phone on silent. I turned it upside down so it wouldn't distract me, and really dove into this manuscript. So when I came up for air, of course, I checked my phone. It was blowing up, and that's when I found out that he'd been convicted on 34 felony counts. And I have to say, that's sort of how I felt. Actually, I kind of got tears in my eyes because this is a guy who has never been held accountable for anything. The stuff he says, the stuff he makes up, the stuff he accuses people of, he just can say anything he wants. Sadly, there are a lot of people who believe him. But finally, in a court of law where there are rules of evidence, he had to sit there and listen to the evidence against him. And he was, I think, held accountable for the first time, and it was important. It was important for the rule of law. No person in this country should be above or below the rule of law. Should be equal under the law. And obviously, there are other, cases that await him. But this particular case, people mischaracterized it. They called it hush money. It was an election interference case. It was deliberately intended to keep information from the American people that might have affected how some people voted. So it was interference in the 2016 election. And I think that we still don't have the complete picture of everything that was done back then to interfere in the election by him or his campaign or his allies, enablers, foreign and domestic. But this was finally in the light of day, and you got to see it in the courtroom.
It was amazing. Speaking of your phone blowing up, I'm wondering, do you get all the great Hillary memes?
I get a lot of them, yeah.
Which is your favorite? Okay, between texting with the giant dark glasses, brushing off your shoulders during Benghazi, or of course you and Obama laughing.
Yeah.
Which is your favorite?
Well, actually, the one with Obama and I laughing has been used so much that, anything that happens, it's thrown in there. And, I saw Barack, I don't know, a couple of months ago, and he said, "Can you remember what we were laughing about?" I said, "I don't have a clue. I can't understand. Boy, that would be the best meme of all, But I think that's my favorite.
Do you think that Donald Trump will ever be held truly accountable? I feel like this New York hush money felt kind of small compared to the other really big things, January 6th, for instance.
Well, I think it depends upon the election, because clearly he's running, so he will never be held accountable. And I think that is most of his motivation. It's to settle scores, live out his grievances, punish his opponents, and avoid legal accountability. Because you're right, I think that case was important, as I said, because of the interference, but the cases about what he did and what he was trying to achieve on January 6th to overturn the results of an election is just horrifying. Classified materials cases against him are, really quite scary. So I don't know, because it really does depend upon this election. If the right the right person is elected, I think then justice will continue to unfold. And I'm not saying, you know, we can prejudge, because I don't want to do that. I'm a recovering lawyer. But there at least will be the cases going forward. I am absolutely convinced, based on what he said, you don't have to guess at this, if he wins, he will pack the Justice Department with cult members of his, people who will do whatever he tells them to do, and those cases will be dismissed. There will not be any real reckoning for what he did on January 6th or what he did with, you know, the classified material. And that's another reason. If you believe in the rule of law, you have to vote for Kamala Harris.
Trump has broken, or hopefully he'll be at least trying. But I, in a way, from the beginning, felt like almost worse than the laws were the norms that he broke. Of just, you know, he started out by calling Mexicans rapists and mocking Gold Star families, delighting in his cruel impressions of the differently abled, bragging about sexually assaulting women. It goes on and on. I mean, if everyone could just, if we everyone lined up, they could name a new low. And that kind of, I feel like it's scary to think we can't go back from that. I have a daughter, and I feel for 8 years I've been saying to her, it wasn't like this. This is not what it should be like. And how do can we put the genie back in the bottle?
Well, it's one of the reasons why I'm working so hard for Kamala, because I think the breaking of the norms, the contempt for the law, the committing or the alleged committing of crimes, all of that is so still unbelievable to not just many Americans, but to the press. The press has a really hard time covering him because they're still trying to squeeze him into the norms of coverage. And he can't be, he can't be treated like anyone else who's ever run for or held office in America.
Both sides. That started with you and our CNN on the one hand, on the other hand, and they just gave both of you equal.
But you know, back then it was new, and I can understand why people couldn't quite figure out what to do with someone who was so blatantly breaking norms and laws. But now there's no excuse. I mean, it is clear that this is a person who is in the mold of a dictator. And there, you know, there isn't any doubt any longer. And he has said himself he wants to be a dictator on day one of his presidency. He has said that he, you know, wants his followers to vote in this election, and then they'll never have to vote again. I mean, if you read history, this is the pattern that people who seek total unaccountable power actually, you know, follow. So I feel like his behavior is disqualifying. He should not have ever even been nominated by the Republicans. Hope is that when Kamala is elected, because I think she has both the political savvy and the personal empathy to really try to connect with people, to sort of break the fever that has taken over our politics, and to be the president for all Americans, which she says over and over again, and really means it. She wants to be that. And I'm hoping then that the Republicans will break free from this hold that Trump has over them. You know, having served for 8 years in the Senate, there are people I serve with who, when I see them on television talking about Trump, I know they know better. It's like a spell has been cast upon them. I'm hoping the election breaks that spell. I hope the Republican Party rids itself of Trumpism and actually becomes a party of the opposition. That's why it's so important for somebody like Liz Cheney to support. She's very honest. She and Kamala do not agree on issues, except the number one overriding issue to save our democracy, to protect our freedoms and our rights. So I'm hoping that this election will be kind of a break, and then we can get back to arguing about, tax policy or whatever we want to argue about,
I felt like obviously there were dark days after 2016, and I think that I became aware of the misogyny kind of out there, and all the internalized misogyny. But then came the Women's March and Me Too, and it felt like everybody woke up, and they got it, and men got it, and women got it. And even after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, there was a sense of activism, a surge of activism and voter turnout in the midterms. But in yesterday's Washington Post, the top story, I don't know if you read it, was about the very real sexism facing Vice President Harris. And there it was again. These quotes from undecided voters who said that women were too emotional to hold the nuclear codes, and that having a woman president would make the United States look weak and like a laughingstock in front of the world. I mean, has there been progress, or is it just me sitting in my bubble hoping for it?
No, I do think there has been progress, but let's not kid ourselves. There is still residual sexism and racism, and it is being given permission by Trump and the people around him. And so what we had hoped is that, we kind of crossed some line where people were much more aware and they wouldn't go back. But Trump's whole campaign is about taking us back. And taking us back to where sexism and racism and homophobia are all kind of back in the culture and society and politics. And I think people have to recognize that we have come a very long way, but the forces at work in this election have a long thread back to the very beginning of our country. There's always been the forces of progress and the forces of, the status quo, even regression. And so this fight is a fight that we have been in for a long time, and we can point to a lot of big accomplishments. But let's not take anything for granted, because part of what Trump is playing to, frankly, is a reaction to George Floyd and the horrible killing that we all saw literally on our TV sets, a reaction to women's progress, which some people sadly see as threatening rather than liberating. And, Justice Elena Kagan gave a speech a couple of weeks ago in New York in which she said, pay attention to what the conservative members, the right-wing members of the court are saying, because if they have their way, they not only wanted to throw, Roe v. Wade over and throw the issue of reproductive rights to the states, they would like to overturn gay marriage, they would like to overturn contraception, they would like to, as one senator, a Republican senator from Indiana said just 2 weeks ago, he said, I think interracial marriage should be left to the states. So think about that. All these decisions were because states were depriving people of rights. Loving v. Virginia was against the state of Virginia that would not permit the Lovings to get married in Virginia. Griswold v. Connecticut in 1965 was a case against the state of Connecticut that made it criminal to buy contraception in the state of Connecticut, even if you were married. And the Griswold case only overturned the criminal statute for married couples, not for single people. That took a couple more years. And of course, we know the Obergefell decision that, codified gay rights across the country. But think about this, if it were thrown back to the states would look very similar to what we are now seeing about reproductive rights. So this election is very much about not letting them take us back, which is why at Kamala's rallies, people are chanting, "We're not going back."
I agree, was just incredible. I have it on my, I've recorded it, and it's now moved the Great British Bake Off off of my list of things that I watched, your speech and all the great speeches and the roll call. I just can't get enough of that. It was so wonderful. And I felt so optimistic. It was so wonderful. And I felt like it's all in our past. And as of yesterday, I'm really scared. And it's happening again. I feel as we get closer to the election, I'm getting really scared. And I'm wondering, what do you have to tell us?
Well, I mean, this is like a giant therapy session. Look, I would not tell you it's not hard and it's not close, because it is both. But I really, really feel that Kamala will win both the popular vote and the electoral vote. I feel that because I do think that many people in this country are drawing the conclusion that whether they agree or not with her, with Democrats about specific issues, they recognize the danger, the threat that Trump poses to our country and the world. And so I think that, the groups of people that are somewhat still to be persuaded and mobilized are Republican women who don't want to vote for Trump, but are still trying to get comfortable with the idea of voting for a Democrat, and voting specifically for Kamala. Independent women, same feelings, there's a lot they don't like about Trump, but, they say things like, well, I don't know much about her, and I want to learn more, and it's a short campaign, so there's a lot of pressure to try to reach those voters and reassure them. Voters who are just tuning in now, people who follow politics, people who, record the Democratic convention and watch it to feel better, are not exactly a majority in the country. And so there are lots of people who are now just paying attention, and, I'm doing everything I can to support her. My husband has just spent, all this time in Georgia and in South Georgia, because, part of the trick of the Electoral College is you have to drive the vote up in the cities like Atlanta. You have to cut the margin against you in places like South Georgia. You're not going to win there, but there's a big difference if you lose 60 to 40 than if you lose, 54 to 46. So the effort to try to convince people, to reassure people, and when we're talking to voters who are wanting to be reassured, that's the kind of thing they say to us. They say, well, I'm just not sure I know enough about her. And so, we try to make sure that, we tell them, and it's not about issues, it's about character and values and temperament and to, the kind of person she is and why she'd be a good president. And on this whole issue that people say, because I mean, I heard it a million times, oh no, I vote for a woman, just not her. And that's, you know, the kind of thing you hear, and you kind of scrape away at that. And now they're not that enthusiastic about voting for any woman, but you know, they don't want to say that, so they say, yeah, somebody else. So you have to kind of make the case. And it is, you know, it's very labor intense. And so when you see where she's going, where Tim Walz is going, where, you know, Gwen Walz and Doug and everybody, all the surrogates, everybody going to the places, it's the same, you know, 7 states over and over again. It's really to reassure people. It's to make sure the people who are for her actually vote and don't, you know, find some excuse, but vote early so that we can then turn our attention to the people who still need to be convinced. But I was talking to some friends of mine who had been canvassing in Pennsylvania, and they were very encouraged by, you know, the people that they're knocking on the doors of, because they're knocking on doors of both weak Democrats who have to be convinced to turn out, and independents and potentially persuadable Republicans. And so there's a very impressive ground game going on, which, you know, doesn't get a lot of coverage, and millions, literally millions of voters are being touched. So I am, you know, I'm very optimistic. I am. I'm an optimist who worries a lot, you know?